Hey, welcome to the Kingdoms Podcast. My name is Luke and I host this with my buddy Matt Ma. And our goal is to empower you to discover how your faith impacts culture for God's kingdom. To do that, we're sitting down with different men and women from all kinds of disciplines to uncover how they, through their ambitions and vocational skill set, make a difference in the lives of those around them. And so if this is helpful to you, we'd love it if you could like it, share it, and subscribe. In the meantime, enjoy today's episode. Well, friends, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited because when I was a young adult, I had the privilege in 2012 of being at a missions conference that celebrates the beauty of God's heart and his vision for the world. It's called Urbana, and it happens every 3 years in St. Louis, Missouri. And today, the vice president of InterVarsity, who actually directs this conference now, Ruth Hubbard, is joining me for this interview. Ruth, thank you so much for being with us.
And thank you for having me. I'm delighted.
You know what? It's awesome to be able to connect with people like you who are in a big way dreaming big about how to invite especially young adults to consider how God would make the most out of their lives. So really, really excited to explore faith formation and what the Urbana Conference is about and missional living in the next few minutes with you. But maybe before we go there, could you give us a thumbnail sketch of who you are, your personal adventure, if you will, of following Jesus, whether that's, starting with young adulthood and your first Urbana, which I know was 1987, and how that's continued up to the present day.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. And greatly because it's a story of a winding road. It's not been a straight pathway for me. And part of what I've learned about God is in his faithfulness. He guides me in ways that work for me. That makes sense to me. And it's not like a one way that God works in life. And he's certainly done that with me. So I grew up in a family. My mom and dad love Jesus. They're a part of the church. My dad's a retired pastor. And so grew up in a faith community and always anticipated that something about my life was going to be involved in ministry, whatever that might look like. I didn't know, but that was just an assumption. We had missionaries around us all the time. And so that seemed like a reasonable opportunity of something to do. It certainly seemed cool. They had great stories and I like to tell stories. And so I thought if you're a missionary, you get to tell stories. So that'd be good. When I went to college, I received my undergrad degree in graphic arts journalism. And at that point in life, I was thinking that I might be interested in advertising. It was a fascinating field. I was enamored by the work that could be there. And partway through my senior year, through a number of experiences, God revealed to me that where my heart really was to teach. Wow. And I think I've been avoiding teaching because in the mid-'80s, teaching nursing and flight attendants were things that were acceptable jobs for women to take. And it kind of was like going, I don't want to do one of those, like what women do or say they're going to do when they don't know what else to say. Now, right. That's an unfair characterization to my friends who knew and were called to that. But in my head, I was like, I don't want to be a teacher. That's what you do when you don't know what to do. I had assumptions, but I was there. And God led me into that. And I thought, oh, good, then I'll be a teacher for missionary kids. And when that wasn't what was happening, I thought, I'll be a teacher in an inner city or a public school where I can, and I think I had typical dreams of taking Jesus to the world and, doing all these great things.
Yeah.
I wanted to do important things.
Yeah.
And God led me to teach at a small Christian school in Indiana. And found out my first year teaching, I found out how ill prepared I was. And by my second or third year, I thought I was going to be in it for life. Just loved the classroom. Wow. Just loved it. At the end of my first year teaching, I had a chance to teach English to middle school teachers in the People's Republic of China.
Wow. Yeah.
And again, this is the late 1980s. Not a lot of people had been to China or were going. This was new opportunities in those days. And because I'd done that, I was invited by the organization I taught with to help represent them at the Urbana Student Missions Conference in 1987.
Nice.
So I'd not gone as a student. I went as a 25-year-old. It was my second year teaching. I'd been overseas. And I thought God was probably going to call me into full-time missions at that point.
Okay.
And he didn't. And I was a little disappointed and a little bit ticked off, um, because I thought that was where the really cool stuff was going.
Okay.
And the idea of staying home and doing something that felt more mundane to me at that moment in my life was frustrating. Turned out to be exactly the right thing, and I adored it. And so after Urbana 15, there was a nudge. Would you consider applying for this role? Is this something that you'd be interested in?
Yeah.
And set forth and went through the process for that. But again, it was God. I'll tell you again. I keep saying this. It gets weirder all the time. But if this is you asking, my answer is going to be yes. You just have to show me that it's you asking.
Yeah.
And I realized that if I go back I'll go all the way back to junior high. So out in the Estes Park, Colorado, so up in the mountains at a conference with 1,000 or so junior high and high school students, and a sermon on a sermon series from the book of John, and standing in a place in a moment at the age of 14 saying, God, whatever you want me to do, wherever you want me to go, I'll say yes.
Hmm.
And the rest of my life has been God offering me opportunities, I think early on, to prove to myself that I meant it.
Hmm.
I mean, he knew what I meant and didn't mean. He's like, "Oh, I know where your heart was. You need to know that you'll say yes to me when I ask you to do something."
Hmm.
And learning to get comfortable with the fact that, oh, that's right. I'm a person who says yes when God asks me to do stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, and and then learning how to discern, how do I know this is God?
Mm.
Can I just always assume if it's ridiculous, it's like, no, because other ridiculous thing come along, and that's not necessarily the criteria.
Mm.
Um, and so bringing a community of people around with me, there are a handful of friends who've walked with me through, the last 5 or 6 big decisions like that.
Yeah. Which is
Uh,
which is so pivotal. But that is, I so appreciate you saying that. Like, am I going to be a person that will say yes to God? Because I've heard it said that faith is spelled RISK. And so often we find ourselves both, as you said, like white knuckling it and freaked out, but at the same time also realizing that God's leading us into what's really a sweet spot in terms of how he's gifted us,
yeah.
and it's stretching and it's sometimes stressful, and we're very aware of our weakness, and yet then we have the privilege of seeing God show up in these beautiful and formative and life-changing ways.
But it's somewhere to come to the place to say, it's not a risk if it's in the very heart of what God is asking us to do.
Yeah.
That's actually not risky. It
Mm,
looks risky, but
mm.
it's not.
Yeah, it's an adventure. Yeah, well said. Well said. Ruth, you referenced a few minutes ago as a 14-year-old being at that place of saying, will I say yes to God anytime? And feeling that moment of real, compulsion. And then, as you said, through those some of the earlier experience of your life, really wrestling to consider, will I be that person that continues to say yes?
Mm.
And I think that's significant because oftentimes the high school years, the young adult years it's a season in people's lives where they start to think critically about the faith of their parents or the faith that they've been given. They start to have a bit more maturity, even just to be able to consider life, the way they want to live, what they want to pursue, what values or faith has been passed on to them. And oftentimes it's not uncommon to see young people sometimes pull away from faith or value systems, or even really be kind of critical or skeptical of what
Mhm.
their parents or their grandparents or even their great grandparents have believed and lived towards. And obviously for you, and especially in directing a conference like Urbana, you're wading right into that with young people and people asking, what authority does God have in the call in my life and things like that. And so I wonder, sometimes though, that skepticism can still be good. It can lead to good change. It can lead to brand new opportunities. And so when you interact with young people and you see that skepticism, or you see that maybe that healthy criticism, or maybe not so healthy criticism of older generations, what do you find yourself pointing them towards? What is maybe the new work or the exciting adventure that you see God could have for them, and how do you point them in that direction?
Yeah, I think that one of the things I missed most when I left teaching high school was being in the middle of the muck with students who were starting to ask really hard questions and
Mm,
doubting things and pushing back on and pointing at hypocrisy. And if you have within you a strong sense of justice, um, basically that the North American church can get really frustrating when you watch certain aspects of the church and just go,
yeah,
this doesn't make any sense to me. How
yeah,
and sometimes it's the you don't yet understand. Okay, fine. And sometimes it's yeah, we know. You're right. Like that's a hot mess. And it,
hmm,
it shouldn't be that way. It's the realities that happen as you're in your teens and into your 20s when you begin to see behind the curtain
mm,
of the way the local church may function, or the community works, or people that you held up with great respect but you
yeah,
only ever saw the shiny part of them.
mm.
It's a little bit like when you meet somebody that you've only ever seen on Instagram and you
Mm.
go,
Wait a
you're
second.
not that good looking and you eat junk. Like, I never would have known that. You don't really
Yeah.
like puppies. The puppies don't all like you.
No.
Whatever it is that we've created, we have a better chance today of creating fake persona, but that's been a reality since the dark age. I mean, we
Mm,
we make fake personas
mm,
and put them out there for people. And when you begin to see behind things, you realize, wow, this isn't what I thought it was, and
yeah,
it should cause us to question. So
yeah,
I would say, and I think I'm with you on this one from the way you even asked the question. I encourage it.
mm,
I encourage the ask the hard questions. And I do that because I have complete confidence in God.
hmm,
And so I remember back, so I'm going to quote somebody from Urbana 87 of all places, but I got the
yeah,
cassette tapes from that conference from the plenaries and I played them a million times. So I used to be able to do with the talks pretty much from
nice.
memory, like going, hey, I can do Tony Campolo's talk and Rebecca Pippert. So Rebecca Pippert was spoke at that conference and was talking about someone that she met who basically said to her, I don't believe this God, this Jesus that you're talking about. I
Mm,
don't believe in this Jesus you're talking about. And her response to the woman was, describe this Jesus you don't believe in.
mm,
Describe this Jesus for me.
yeah,
And as the person described it, she goes, yeah, I don't believe in that Jesus either.
hmm,
That often the Jesus that a young adult, that a teenager will reject is not the Jesus of Scripture. It's not the Holy Son of God.
hmm,
It is a somewhat warped, occasionally, you know, bent into I'm going to make Jesus into who I want him to be, so he supports
mm,
my political party, or he
mm,
supports my preference for one thing or another. He likes me more than other people. Whenever we do any of those things and create fake Jesuses, we're taking God's name in vain.
hmm,
And anybody's got a right to say, that Jesus I don't believe in. I don't follow that Jesus. I can't bear with that Jesus. And say,
yeah,
yeah, you're right. And so it's sometimes some of that skepticism is coming out of just the sheer complexity of life, of how do you answer the question, how does a God of love allow cancer to kill my grandmother?
yeah,
Like, that's just the sheer complexity of life. And some of it comes out of very legitimate like recognitions of this doesn't make sense to me. And it's like, it doesn't make sense. You're right.
yeah,
I one of my dreams for Urbana, this next Urbana, as we study from the first 12 books of Acts, is that a generation that statistically is rejecting the church
mm,
will fall in love with the church that God designed.
yeah,
We'll
yeah,
see what Jesus intended when he said, wait till the Holy Spirit comes. I promised you the Holy Spirit. Wait till that happens. And then you are my witnesses to the ends of the earth.
yeah,
And essentially sent them to go and do what I've done with you. Be my disciples
yeah,
and make disciples. And we watch them in the book of Acts beginning to do those things. I go,
yeah,
oh, I want us to fall in love with that church and say, God, whatever you want me to do, wherever you want me to
mhm.
go, I want to be the person you've called me to be, a part of this community.
So to drill down on that a little bit, because that is so valid. Like to realize that this is a generation that statistically is saying, I don't want to touch the church. I don't want to touch even the word evangelical in some ways. Um, how do you find yourself speaking into that and helping people to maybe see a little bit more clearly that maybe what they're rejecting isn't firstly Christ, but maybe it's their given subcultural value system, on whatever point that would be, where it's political or some other thing. How do you start to really give people not only an understanding of what isn't following Jesus, that's been really woven into their faith systems, but the beauty and the vibrancy of what it does mean to follow Jesus?
Hmm. Hmm. Uh, I've 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 realized that um, all of us, as we come to know God better and more, um, are drawn to Him. He created us for a right relationship with Him.
Hmm.
He created us to be in right relationship with each other and to be in right relationship with the world that he made around us, with the earth, with the animals, like he really did intend that. And the closer we get to him and to that design, the more we grow to love him and want to be like him, want to emulate him, want to reflect his glory back,
Yeah.
which is worship.
Yeah.
And so on the one hand, I said, let's not be afraid to have the hard conversations because God is God, and asking hard questions is not a problem.
Mm-mm.
We have got, for those of us who are in positions of leadership, and I don't care if this is an 18-year-old who's a leader on their campus in a Bible study, or an almost 60-year-old who's a leader of an event, we've got to get over being afraid. Like, I sometimes don't have the answers to stuff,
Mm.
but I'm not God. I don't have to.
Yeah.
You might ask me a question, go, I don't really know. I don't know what to do with that. I've never figured out how to explain that really well.
Mm.
But everything I know about God says he does know. And if I need to, he'll tell me. I can tell you what I know about Jesus. I can tell
Mm.
you what I've experienced authentically with Jesus. And the more I'm with Jesus, the more rightly I reflect him.
Mm.
There's uh, at the last Urbana, we studied Revelation, which was a really fun, wild ride for us. And there's a reference in Revelation to Jesus as the faithful witness to God, the perfect, the quintessential faithful witness. And then there's another ways in which that term is used, referencing the martyrs that's a faithful witness to who God is. And so, in preparation for and in response to that, as I began to do some other study, I found myself in the book of Hebrews,
Mm.
and Hebrews 11 and 12. And it's the thing, since we're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. So it gives us this sort of hall of fame witnesses. And then,
Oh
since
yeah.
we're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, let's run the race set before us, and run it in a way that has integrity. Let's do that thing. So in the midst of this, looking at the idea of what does it mean to be a faithful witness, um, I came across an odd reference using the term in one of the Psalms, and it was to the moon, that the moon is the faithful witness to the sun.
Mm.
And the image of that captured my imagination, and I realized this is what I'm called to be.
Mm.
You and I are called to be the moon to the sun, who is the sun,
Mhm.
the light. And we sometimes try to generate light and we get ourselves in trouble. Or we try to absorb it and soak it up and hold on to it, and that never turns out right. There are all kinds of ways, but when we seriously say, I want to align myself as directly to the sun as I can,
Yeah.
and I want to reflect back all the light I can, we are a full moon, we shine brightly, and we actually light up darkness.
Mm.
And so I think that's what we're called to, is how do I live my life in a way that I am, as much as I possibly can be, face on with God,
Yeah.
fully devoted to him, loving him. So loving God, loving his word, loving his people, loving his purposes in the world, and reflecting that in such a way that people see my good works and praise the Father,
Yeah.
because of them.
Yeah.
They see the light reflecting. It's not my light.
Mm.
They see the light of God reflecting off of me. I'm just a gray lump. The moon's really not a spectacular planet.
Hmm.
Don't have to be. Don't have to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that is well said. I remember being at a youth conference when I was in high school, and that was the theme for like the weekend was
Mm,
be the moon. But it's a constant reminder that can be easy to overlook sometimes. But well said. Appreciate
mm,
you sharing that even from your own devotional journey. I wonder. I'd love to pivot with you right now, Ruth,
sure.
and look a little bit more specifically at really the Urbana conference itself, but also the heartbeat behind that of kingdom ambition. And I know I was looking at your website, and the Urbana website says that God uses Urbana to reveal his glory and call generations to surrender to Christ's lordship. Urbana is a sacred space where students find calling and joining the Lord's global mission, whether across campus, zip codes, or the world. And it sounds awesome. And oftentimes we hear things like that and we're like, all right, but we'd love to look at kind of a simple question, but a crucial question,
Mm.
which is why does that surrender? Why does that calling matter today? Why is it important that we be a people that young people consider how they might live with ambition for God's kingdom?
Yeah, this, while the ways that God works through us and among us change because the context of our world changes, opportunities change, the realities of things change. Um, God is on mission to bring all things that he created back in alignment with his original design.
Hmm.
He wants to reconcile all people to
Yeah.
himself. He says
Yeah.
that. I want to reconcile all people to myself. And accomplished that ultimately through Jesus' death, life, death, and resurrection. But by in his wisdom has chosen to work through us essentially to be incarnate in the world today by his Holy Spirit in us, working in the world,
Yeah.
going about our life, doing the things that we do in such a way that we bear witness to who God is. We
Hmm.
reflect his glory and do that thing. That hasn't changed. It doesn't change. It will not change until the kingdom of God is fully reestablished on earth.
Yeah.
And there's a point at which, well, we could have a conversation, but let's not go there about, how does your interpretation of the end times say what's that gonna look like? There's a
Hmm.
point of it that says I don't really care how it happens. It's gonna happen, and
Same.
and 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 when it does, that there is an era that ends
Hmm.
as the kingdom is reestablished. But
Yeah.
Jesus taught his disciples to pray, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven."
Hmm.
So there's something about the now of the kingdom of God
Hmm.
that is appropriate for us to pray for
Yeah.
and to work toward and to
Yeah.
be a part of.
Yeah.
And so, um, any of us who are followers of Jesus are called to that.
Hmm.
When I talk about calling, I'm talking, for me, when I reference calling, I'm not talking about a specific, unique, you are special for a special purpose to do a special work in a special place. And if you don't do it, nobody will kind of calling person. Like that doesn't fit. Frankly, Luke, if you won't do it, God will find somebody else.
True
He
say.
will, because
Yeah.
God is going to accomplish what God is going to accomplish. He is in
Yeah.
the heavens. He has supreme authority. He has sovereignty. He is powerful. He doesn't need us in that sense,
Hmm.
but he longs for us
Hmm.
to have the joy and the delight to walk with him and to be a
Yeah.
part of what he does, in the same way that a parent might have a great delight in their very young child walking alongside them, getting to participate in doing the thing that they love to do,
Yeah.
even if they don't do it nearly as well as they could.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I don't care that you don't do this well. I love doing it with you. I
Mm.
love watching your excitement as we do this thing.
Yeah.
And so God invites us into this work that he's done. And the calling is really to come to a point where you realize, oh, God's invitation is for all of us, which means me.
Yeah.
And it means me individually, but it also means me in the community of the people of faith that I live with.
Yeah.
And it means me wherever I am, doing whatever it is that I'm called to do.
Yeah.
So Paul gave us the words, you are God's workmanship, God's poem. You're the thing that God created to do the good work that God prepared in advance for you to do.
Mm.
And so whatever that might be, we can do it in a way that brings kingdom into this earth.
Yeah.
And so there are kingdom engineers and kingdom nurses and kingdom house painters and kingdom pastors, just as it's very possible for someone to do full-time ministry, to stand perhaps in a pulpit and preach every Sunday and do it in a way that does not reflect the glory of God.
Hmm.
A person can dig a ditch every day of their life and do it in a way that brings God immense pleasure
Yeah.
and shines light in ways that the world goes, I see you and I see something beyond you.
Yeah.
Who is it? Who do I see
Yeah.
beyond you? And
Yeah.
so it's not about what we do. It's about how we are aligned with God and doing it for his pleasure and his glory in the way that he would do it. If Jesus were a ditch digger, how would he dig a ditch?
Yeah. Wow. Well, it's not about what we do, it's about how we do it in aligning ourselves with God and reflecting him. When when you think about especially this next generation or millennials and Gen Zs, but especially young adults who are wrestling with that, grappling with calling, thinking about, I want to make a difference in the world. And, can I do that if I have maybe a quote unquote typical, a day job in the
Mhm,
United States or
mhm,
Canada or England, wherever it might be. Um, I think you see a lot of people like that who will feel galvanized by something like the movements against injustice we see in the world, whether that's human trafficking or systematic racism. There's this longing to say, I want to be a part of something bigger than myself that moves justice forward, or that brings rightness into our world. And as you navigate conversations with young people, or even at Urbana, as there's all kinds of organizations that are represented there that are all about justice, how do you find yourself speaking, especially to young people, but to people in general, and saying, this longing we have for justice is actually evidence of God's kingdom purposes in our world, of us being made in the image of God, our longing to see things made right. That's actually a fraction of God's heart for the world. How do you find yourself talking through people and helping them to marry those concepts of our innate longing for justice with the abundance and the magnitude of God's kingdom purposes to make the world right?
mhm. Because for most of us, we're going to have an aspect of the gospel that most resonates with us.
Hmm.
There's just that. So I see the Lausanne gatherings over the course of history. Most recently, have been talking about the whole church taking the whole gospel to the whole world
Hmm.
as the they said that's the mark. We want the whole gospel, and they're talking about evangelism and discipleship and justice and compassion and creation care, very specifically the
Hmm.
whole of the gospel, that God's intent is to bring wholeness to all areas of life,
Yeah.
and that it would be done by the whole global church, not just the Western church, not just this, the whole church, and that gospel would spread to the whole world
Hmm.
through them. And yet, the reality of our experience will be that any one of us is probably going to have gifts and skills and passions that connect us more to one aspect of that than the other.
Hmm.
So I may be a person who it's the care of creation, which is exactly my sweet spot.
Hmm.
I have deep love for it. My skills are as this is not true. I'm making all this up. This is not me. I have skills as a veterinarian. I've been given opportunity. And so my life may focus primarily on that. I may become a person who is an advocate for that, who finds ways to partner with others who care deeply about that and find those. And that may be my main thing, but that doesn't mean that I am not invited and, in fact, commanded to proclaim the gospel in word and to live out the justice of God with my
Hmm.
deeds,
Hmm.
and to share my resources as a compassionate, generous person as well, and to be a disciple who's a disciple making.
Yeah.
Called to the whole gospel,
Yeah.
but my primary focus may be one area of the other. So an understanding of that can be
Yeah.
really helpful for people. And I have friends, they invest most of their life in the area of racial equity, of
Hmm.
justice in areas of racial things. And that's where they commit most of their time and energy into that space. But they have learned to live out those things in all the other areas as well, to live
Yeah.
out the truth in the other places. And I think the same is true for those who are called to proclaim the gospel as evangelists.
Mm.
That may be a primary focus area,
Yeah.
but all of these things are ours in the same way. In the same way that um, a traditional church perspective might have said, it's fine for you to care a lot about justice, but you've got to proclaim the truth through evangelism as well. I would say to the evangelist, it's great that you care deeply about evangelism, but you've got to walk in justice as well. We should
Yeah.
be aware of that. And so I've used the phrase a lot that at Urbana, we're calling people to whole life, whole world discipleship.
Yeah.
That it's every aspect of your life from one end to the other in every ways you can think about that. So beginning to end, breadth, depth,
Hmm.
height, all aspects of life can be reflective of the gospel.
Yeah.
And where they're not, they are a bad witness. They're still a
Yeah.
witness. They're just a poor witness.
Yeah.
And where they do reflect God, they're a good witness. They're reflecting well. And that it's to the whole world. Now,
Mm.
I'm everywhere I go, I minister locally. So I can go overseas and then I'm a local minister in the space that I land.
Hmm.
But the key for me is not, does someone cross the street, cross the town, cross the city line, do they cross a national border? So much as to say, do you have a view for the broadest view that God has given you so far? And is that
Yeah.
growing?
Yeah.
Do you see the world in what you do? And so there are times when I'm going to make a purchase of something and I look at it and I don't necessarily say, is this made in America? So I'm from the US and there'll be some who say you should only buy things that are made in the US because that supports the US economy. I go, that's nationalism. That's not Christianity. I mean,
Mm.
it may not be anti-Christian, but let's not confuse those two. That's just saying I want to support my people.
Yeah.
But my global perspective as a Christian is going to say, has this been created in a way that is responsible for the natural resources that it uses,
Mm.
that cares about the people who did the work to do it and paid them a fair wage?
Mm.
Is it shared with me in a way that if it was possible to get it here by using significantly yet less fossil fuel than more fossil fuel, did somebody think about that?
Hmm.
Is this my best choice?
Yeah.
And we could be paralyzed if we worry about 600 checklists for every time we buy a toothpick.
Hmm.
But how do I live in such a way that I'm at least, I begin to be aware of, oh, the decisions I make, the clothes I buy, the car that I drive, if I drive at all, the where I live, all of those things have repercussions. None of them are done in a little tiny thing that only is about me. It's
Mm.
not. Nothing we do is only about us.
Yeah. Yeah. And so how am I living in a way that represents not just, yeah, a gospel of justice or a gospel of creation care or a gospel of preaching or a gospel of what have you, but a whole gospel. I really appreciate that, Ruth. I haven't thought about it that way and what you shared about the Lausanne conference, but that is so valuable because you see that in the church. And that's one of the beautiful beautiful realities of all the pieces of the church coming together, right? Is people saying, I care so much
Mhm.
about this need in the world. And someone saying, I care about this need in the world. And them saying, man, how can we come together to make an eternal difference?
Yeah,
There's actually,
a number of years ago, as I was um, beginning to learn how better to steward my finances.
mm,
So, early in life, you don't feel like you make any money. And I'd been trained, you give 10% to the church and then you just, like, like there was some rules. I grew up with some rules. And when you're young, there's a reason for the law when you're young. It teaches you a pattern of life. But later in life, you go, okay, I want my giving to be more than that. Jesus clearly said it should be something that we do joyfully. And so how does that's got to be more than just skim a percentage off the top, because that's just math.
mm,
And math doesn't do a lot for me personally. So, what does this mean? And as I began to ask questions like, how do you know what missionaries to support? Because that was like, yes, I want to support my local church. I understand why that's an important thing to do. But how do I decide what to do with other money that I'd like to give away, other ways that I'd like to be generous? What
mm.
do I do there? And one suggestion that I've continued to find delight in is someone said, what are the things that stir your heart, but you don't have the gift to do?
Hmm.
You don't have whatever it takes. And I realized, oh, there are certain ministries I'm going to support my entire life because they do stir. There is something in me, the spirit in me stirs up
Mm.
when I hear these stories in ways that it may not respond to other beautiful stories. And yet it's not what I'm gifted to do. It's not what I've been given the opportunity to do.
Mm.
And so I'm always going to support
Yeah.
a few certain things because I care so much about those things.
Yeah. That is wise. That is super wise. And that's exciting because then you realize you get to partner with people, again, in God's mission in the world. Ruth, you once said, whatever talents and passions you're created with, Jesus will invite you to consider how to use them for the benefit of those who aren't in a relationship with him. And so if we were to look specifically at leveraging the gifts, the ambitions that we're given, whether that's shooting a three-pointer or filming a movie or washing dishes, how would you say people just in their everyday rhythms of life can use those gifts to point people to Jesus, and maybe from the overflow of that dream about bigger and better and more extensive influence?
Hmm. I would say that there are two ways to consider how we can use everything that God has given us, the gifts and skills and talents and experiences, for the better of others. And one of them is, as I've described in some ways, to reflect the glory of God in such a way that they see God and are attracted to him, and may ask the questions that sound things like, wow, why is it that you respond to this situation in such a different way than other people? What is it about you? And it gives us a chance to share the story of how Jesus has given us a way to see things and live. And we have a sense of contentment, and I don't fear death. Those kinds of things that give
Yeah.
us a chance to,
Yeah.
as you described it, point people to Jesus, give people a place to say, oh, I see this Jesus in you. And he's attractive.
Hmm.
And I'd like to know more. And so there's that. And I would say that the church in many ways has done an okay job of that. We've said, well, if God created you to be a filmmaker, make films that tell a story that has redemption in it.
Mm.
Now, some people would say, well, you can only tell the Jesus story in film. And I'd say, well, Jesus doesn't even only just tell the Jesus story. So that seems odd. Like, Jesus tells a lot of weird stories but there's also you can tell the story that's the redemption story.
Mm.
And there are a lot of beautiful redemption stories that have been told well in film.
Yeah.
I think there are filmmakers who aren't intentional followers of Jesus who also tell beautiful redemption stories.
Mm.
But there's the tell the redemption story thing.
Mm.
But there's also a reality of we can simply make life better for other people with no strings attached.
Mm.
It's
Yes.
it's a little bit of the principles that you'll see uh, when Daniel and his friends, when Esther, when others were in captive in Babylon. And the instruction that the people are given is, go into this place, settle there, plant gardens, and make the cities you're living in flourish.
Hmm.
It doesn't say make the cities you're living in Jewish.
Mm.
It doesn't say anything about converting the Babylonians to follow after God.
Hmm.
It says make those places flourish.
Yeah.
If we are living in a way that is in alignment with what God intended for us to do and to be and to react to all things, a flourishing will happen where we are, and that flourishing will and should freely and generously spill out on others.
Yeah.
If it's only about us and building a bigger empire of ourselves, we've just bought into the Babylonian, the evil
Mentality.
of Babylon in the figurative sense,
Yeah.
which is, I'm going to build a bigger tower for me.
Yeah.
We're not called to build a bigger tower for me.
Yeah. Wow. To lead to flourishing, which I so appreciate, Ruth, because I think sometimes a lot of Christians, especially, they feel, and maybe in a healthy way, but the importance of verbally sharing the gospel with people, but there can be so much emphasis on that. We're not thinking about that, the garden planting mentality of saying, how is my city physically healthier because of me? How is it a more beautiful place to live because I'm here? How are families relating better because we're here or the church is here? How are people realizing that they're invited to thrive because there are followers of Jesus among them?
And wouldn't we, when I hear someone proclaiming the gospel,
mm,
but I see clear evidences of their greed,
mm,
of their unhealthy relationships, when I see the way they treat each other within their families, when I see evidences in all other categories of things that are not God honoring, they're a clanging gong.
yeah.
And there's a reason why I'll rebel against them too.
Hmm,
It's for the I think even the rebellion of sense, or the disenchantment, maybe is a word, against evangelicalism that many young people are experiencing right now, is for good reason,
yeah.
because they've heard the right words coming out of somebody's mouth, and they've seen things. They go, this can't be.
Mm, mm,
um, and so, to live with that kind of integrity, that is generous. If I come and I proclaim the gospel, even if I proclaim the gospel awkwardly, I'm not terribly gifted in my speech, but I try really hard. I think about people I've known who weren't terribly gifted in their speech, but they would attempt to pray the gospel. But the way they lived their lives was so generous of spirit.
mm,
You went into their home and you felt welcome.
yeah.
The hospitality was beautiful. They didn't have much, but what they had, they shared.
Mm,
That they lived their life. That's the gospel. If we want to see the world transformed, if we want to see revival break out, we've got, I think, on the one hand, we need to lean into our own sin and confession. We need to learn to lament the evil that we've done. We need to own those things, and then we need to learn to live out a life of humble generosity,
yeah.
that reflects the best, and desires others to succeed and to
Yeah.
win, to have the beauty and to experience the wonder of things, and doesn't demand that I will win.
Mm,
I don't think Christians have to win anything.
no, we've got a good victory party coming.
Jesus
Yeah.
won. We don't have to. We got to quit trying to win. It's like,
Yeah.
stop trying to get the trophy.
Yeah. You're already set. You already got it. Ah, yeah. To invite people to that encounter with the living God in the way we live and love. That's beautiful and messy and compelling, but the way you talk about it makes me, it gives you holy goosebumps. It makes you get more fired up about the prospect of being a part of that. Ruth, when we've talked a bit earlier about missions or cross-cultural engagement, and I think with the rise of secularism in the West, we've seen obviously just increasing need in our own backyards, our neighborhoods, for people to discover the gospel in its wholeness and its impact for their lives. And so, especially given your role and as someone who's really thinking critically about how that gospel is expressed, when you look at countries that have post-Christian cultures, so places where at one point in time Christianity really was seen as a vibrant faith or a really important part of culture and society. What are some of your thoughts for how the church can have presence in those places, for how Christians can have presence, especially among people who might say, "Oh yeah, like, oh, you're a Christian. Yeah, I have no interest in that. I don't want any part in that." And their attitude towards faith in Jesus is that it's kind of stale and outdated and irrelevant. What words of wisdom would you share on that front?
Yeah, so there's a few things there that come to mind. One of them is and I think we're going to have to say us, because I'm pretty sure Canada and the U.S. are secular. We're trying to hold on to maybe we're edging toward. It's like, we're over the edge
Mm,
in a as a society in so many ways. And um, for the church, the remnant of the faithful who live in these places, is to live out an authentic, gracious, generous faith that doesn't try to fight the culture all the time.
yeah.
Not because the culture's right,
Mm,
but but it's like going, that's not what we're here for. That's not what
Yeah.
we're here. So I think there's that, but we've talked about those kinds of things a good
Mhm.
bit. I think another place that we can see great hope is to recognize the way that the church in places where it is thriving can serve us and lead us.
Hmm.
And so I think that the tendency is to say, well, we may be a post-Christian society, but we gave, I think of the Western church, and we can name all these great authors and preachers and theologians throughout a period of history where an awful lot of the big names we quote, we like to quote C.S. Lewis, or we quote J.I. Packer, or others, and we'll say, these are people that came from, and it's like going, yeah, but that was historical.
Mm.
Where where are the powerful preachers and teachers of today? And
Mhm.
I think we're missing them because their first language might not be English,
Mm.
and
Wow.
their passport is not from the U.S. or Canada or the UK. It's from somewhere in Africa. It's from somewhere in Asia. It's from somewhere in South America. And how can we humble ourselves and say, what is the Holy Spirit leading you to know and believe and understand? How can we broaden our study of Scripture to
Mm.
listen to the preaching and theology from other places
Mm.
and say, how has God revealed himself to you that can help me live out my life faithfully today?
Yeah.
See, in a place where if you go to Western Christians who feel some semblance of suffering because of their faith, and I probably had a little sarcastic in my tone even right there, because we sometimes think we're suffering when people make fun of us
Mm.
for our faith, and it's like going, oh really? That's not really suffering, but okay. But our tendency in that space is to then pray that God would let us rise up and show them that they're wrong, and silence the oppressor
Mm.
who's making fun of me. And like that's our tendency to pray. It's like, oh God,
Yeah.
would you please make them stop
Mm.
and make me okay again and make me popular, or whatever it
Mm.
is. we,
Mm.
we, we can be in that place. If you talk to men and women, our brothers and sisters around the world who are in places where truly their life is in a pretty tenuous place because
Mm.
of their faith, where they truly have suffered. Everyone can name people who have died
Mm.
because of faith. People have
Yeah.
been displaced because of their faith. And you ask them, I had a colleague who asked some people in a Middle Eastern context, what would you have the Urbana audience know about you? What would
Mm.
you want them to know?
Yeah.
And how would you want them to pray? Two
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah.
This informs a lot in my life. I want them to know that they have brothers and sisters here.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, and ask them to pray that we would be faithful to the end. And I just go,
Whatever end that is.
how do we, and for me, it's a discipline far more than it is my natural expression.
Mm.
But to say, God, make me faithful through whatever it is we're in,
Yeah.
rather than rescue me from this bad thing.
Yeah.
So even in the midst of a global pandemic, while I want to see vaccines that work, I want an end to this crazy sickness. I want people to breathe again. I can't wait till we're all outdoors again,
Mm.
and talking to one another, even if we don't know each other. I mean, like, I really want to shake hands with somebody. Like,
Yeah.
that's a long time. So
Oh yeah.
I want to see that. But how can we walk in such a way that my prayer is less save us from this pandemic, and more make me faithful through it?
Yeah.
And so I
Amen to
think
that.
that in a secular society, how do we walk in a way that says, don't save me from this secular society? How do I walk faithfully in it?
Yeah.
And it's where we can look at people like Daniel in Babylon.
Mhm.
That would be a good Joseph in Egypt.
100%.
Like the Jesus in Palestine.
Yeah.
Like, these are people who lived in occupied territories. They did not live with freedom. They did not live with opportunity. They lived now Joseph had some privilege, but it was still couched in a sense of slavery. So how do we walk in that place, and how do we learn from those who have gone before us in places that are difficult and say, "Oh, I need to learn to pattern my life more like that." That's what faithful discipleship looks like
Yeah.
in this context. And so where do we do that? And we're privileged in both sides of the border that separates us, that we have communities that are filled with faithful men and women who, because of their faith in Jesus, left their homes and traveled to a place where they were received refuge,
Hmm. Yeah.
sometimes embraced more than others as immigrants.
Yeah.
But the diaspora communities amongst us, many of them, not all, but many of them are filled with Christians
Yeah.
who can show us how to walk in a
Faithfully.
place and walk faithfully in the face of adversity.
Yeah. Yeah. No kidding. You mentioned earlier how sometimes we feel like we're facing persecution when people make fun of us. And you think of the scripture that says, you haven't yet resisted to the point of shedding blood. And it's like, oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. That is, yeah, hugely significant. Ruth, you had mentioned this earlier, kind of at the beginning of our conversation, and as we kind of get to the close of it, it's a question I've actually been really looking forward to asking you, because I find myself in my own life trying to wrap my head and my heart around how to live this way. But it's just asking, how do we live from a heart posture of saying yes to God? And maybe in that, to help us as listeners and to help me understand that, do you have any examples you can point to of people you've seen, or maybe from your own life, of saying yes to God and yes to his purposes, and the beauty of the redemption work that he's done as an overflow of that?
Mm-hmm. I think that some is to come to a place in your own life where you realize, I'm never going to do this perfectly. So
Mm,
for those who have the tendency toward perfectionism, it's like going, okay, not going to be perfect in this thing. Um, but I would say that for most of us, early on and then at different times throughout our entire lives, it will be obedience and not our heart. Like, there are times when it's not my heart that says yes.
mm,
I choose to say yes, even when my heart is going, no, no way, not going to do it. You can't make me do this. This is too much.
mm,
And to know that we can do that authentically before God.
mm,
There's incredible freedom. I remember the times when I began to recognize that I could say to God directly to his face, as much as there is such a thing, you are ticking me off with this thing. This hurts. I can't believe you're going to make me give up this thing that I love. I can't believe you're going to make me walk away from something I care so much about. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not like it's a bad thing. Why don't you know that I could say that with all the angst I felt, and God didn't make fun of me. He didn't belittle me in that. But there would come a point where we say, but as much as this makes me mad, I'm still going to do what you say, because choose. I choose to say yes,
mm,
and to take steps and say, you better give me the strength to live this one out, because I
mm,
cannot do this. But I have no motivation personally to do this.
mm.
I have none. I have zero. This is not, there's nothing about this that I like,
Yeah.
but I'm going to walk in a sense of yes, because so yes is going to be a choice, but God in his grace often, not always, allows our heart to be softened by the choice of yes,
Mm,
so that our heart begins to take that posture.
yeah. Yeah.
I believe that um, we can act out our obedience and become people who walk in obedience. Now, is it always perfect? No, I think there are some aspects in which we are always going to feel something in us that says, I really want to say no to this.
Mm,
I really want to say no to every day. This one is only ever going to be about obedience.
mm,
But even having language around that can be so freeing,
yeah.
to be able to say, that I have, for friends of mine who will, if we make a comment to one or the other, like going, oh, I so respect that, how freely you leaned into that thing, and they're going, oh no, it wasn't free, cost a lot, mattered and snot, threw things around, cost a
Mm-hmm.
little bit, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that looks like in us, because we've all got our way that we do. Even if you don't say any swear words, we all have the ways that we sort of, but it's not, this is all obedience right now.
Yeah.
There's nothing about this that any, and having language around that, and recognizing that the grace of God is enough.
Yeah.
in my complete lack of emotive
Yeah.
desire to do the thing. And
Yeah.
so that the other thing that and I've alluded to it is, don't exclude people from your life who are not saying yes to God, because we're called to be in relationship with the people around us,
Hmm.
and not to create these little holy huddles that are annoying as all get out.
Hmm.
But we should have people in our lives who are also walking out a yes.
Yeah.
And so that we have it's the place where you turn to people. Got a few friends I turn to and I say, I don't have the faith to do this today. And God in his grace will often let at least one of them say, I do. I'll do it for both of us.
Hmm.
Okay. It's the image we have of Moses, where he can't hold his own arms up, physically can't hold his arms up any longer, but
Hmm.
they're having victory as long as his arms are up. So
Yeah.
he sits on a rock and two other people hold his arms up.
Yeah.
I believe we are called to live interdependently with one another, which means there are days when I can't hardly make the word yes come out of my mouth. And I've had friends who will come up and say, I know you're a yes. I know you are going to do this. And it's like, I am, but oh man, it's not easy to say yes to this today.
Yeah. Yeah. But sometimes emotions follow obedience,
Yeah.
and it's our privilege to choose the yes. Wow. That is a rich point to land the plane on. Ruth, we should do this again sometime. You've got a lot of rich insights and some beautiful ways of making complex concepts not only tangible and able to understand and grasp hold of, but inspiring and compelling. So thank you a ton for what you've shared. And would actually, before we land the plane, would want to ask, where could people learn more about you, more about the Urbana Missions Conference? What are some of the best ways online for people to get connected?
Yeah, so we're in a down year in our Urbana cycle. It's
Mm.
normal where we're just not as active. But there's urbana.org website has basic information as well as archives of multiple Urbanas. So
Mm.
all the plenary sessions in video are there, other resources that people can poke around and find. And then Urbana is on your typical social media things. So Urbana Missions on whether it's Facebook or Instagram or something you can find and follow. And I'd love that. I would tell people follow Instagram. You follow Twitter if you want to, but there's not much going on in the Twitter sphere
Mm.
for us right now. Um, and then I'm in the same spot. I'm on Instagram,
Mhm.
so it's a private account. But if people look for my name, um, I say yes mostly, unless people really scare me. So you can try to scare me and see if I say no to you, because that could
Yeah.
be really fun. But um, if people
Right
are
on.
doing that, but yeah, I'd encourage people toward those Urbana spaces and
Awesome.
to do that. And
Yeah. And for me personally, as someone who was at Urbana in 2012, I would second that, to really invite people to check that out. It's a rich experience to be a part of, and learning what it looks like to say yes to God's calling and purpose in your life. So thank you for that, Ruth. Thank you for myself and many others who've been blessed through
yeah.
Urbana and your efforts with InterVarsity. Thank you. And thank you so much for the time you've taken today to share your heart with us.
It's been a delight. With you, look forward to seeing what it is that God's going to do as He raises up another generation of people who are faithful to Him,
Yeah.
who learn to say yes. I don't believe that God uh, is is only capable of raising up the masses. I think He raises up small groups of people who walk in faithfulness,
Mm.
and look forward to seeing this generation, the all the statistics that are out there about this thing and that, oh yes, people are leaving the faith and whatever. And I go, the faithful aren't
Mm.
leaving the faith.
Mm.
The faithful aren't,
Yeah.
and perhaps it's those who weren't as committed, who are. And I don't believe that once they walk away, they've walked away forever.
Mm.
God is faithful to bring us back to Himself as well, and
Yeah.
so we live in a place of hope.
Yeah. Yeah. So God make us faithful. Thank you, Ruth.
Yeah, pleasure.